Welcome to Radical Self-Care, caring for self, life, and others. My name is Olga Nikolajev. I am a death educator and grief counselor, as well as a death doula mentor. And I have spent a large part of my life seeking to find ways to build resilience, both within myself and also to help others so they can better manage some of the stressors that are in our everyday lives, both those that we have some control over and ways that we can move through, as well as those stressors that we don't have a lot of control over. And so my intent with this very brief webinar is to provide for you some insights and give you some time to reflect upon the ways in which you manage the stress in your life and how to move forward in acquiring some new skills and some new insights that might be helpful. So why should you spend any time with me? I wanted to just share with you some of what other folks have said in relationship to how in some of the workshops that I also conduct, such as Speaking the Unspeakable, and the ways in which people have felt very comfortable and safe and without any judgment from me as the facilitator. I also wanted to show you that people have oftentimes been left with wanting to know more, wanting to know and experience and get engaged in the kinds of activities that can help us to be with all of those stressors, and specifically with the stressors of grief, dying, and death. And I also here in the statement wanted to show you that there is an opportunity for us to stay present with what is, and that includes our grief, that includes our personal as well as collective suffering. So I just want you to, for a moment, put yourself in a situation in which you felt stressful, or maybe that might be a bit too much for this particular exercise, but I want you to just look back or assess your current life experience and reality and to see what are the stressors in your life. It may be the stressors of not having enough time, of having too many demands, of still going through a process of grieving. It might also be that there are things currently within our life experience that we cannot control. It is not up to us. And so all of those create a number of stressors which impact our physical body in such a way that it actually puts us into more of a deficit. So if you think about our human experience and you think about the way in which our physiology was created, there are parts of our brain that are very much hardwired to defend ourselves from terror, from things that are harmful to us on a number of different levels. And what happens over time, and many folks have researched this and it makes sense, is that the brain and those parts of the brain that are in charge of balancing or decreasing some of the impact of those stressors get really taxed out. And I think globally, personally, I think many of us are at that point of not knowing what to do because we are tired, we are taxed, we're fatigued, we have compassionate fatigue, we have moral injury in the way in which we try to do the best that we can with what we have in a system that isn't always conducive to change. And so I want to just acknowledge the fact that we're sitting, both personally and collectively, with a lot of stress and a lot of loss. So I'm just putting this in here if you'd like more information. So here's a gentle reminder. I am always willing to hold a safe space, and I hope that you are too for this work for yourself. I share from my own experience, as I think it's important for you to share yours when the door is open for others to receive information that may illuminate some of the things that they can do differently. I think it's important to be willing to practice self-care. It's one of the hardest things, and we continue to have those reminders that we need to put on our mask first before we assist others. And it is a dedication to one's own life force energy to spend some time in self-care. I acknowledge that you are willing to learn, and that's why you are here. And so again, acknowledge the fact that we are learning. We are continuing to always learn every day as an opportunity to learn something new. And as somebody who is now on the other half of life spectrum, so I am now over 50, I recognize that there are so many things that I don't know and so many more things that I can still learn. So I want you to just create a space inside of yourself for some learning, for an opportunity to see things a bit differently. We've done a bit of an assessment of some of the stresses that you may have in your life. And you might also make an assessment of the ways in which you are currently coping with, managing, trying to find balance, both the quote unquote functional or adaptive ways and the ones that may be quote unquote unhealthy. Again, reminding you that when we are stressed, we will go to the thing that we know works and has been tested through time and time again throughout our life. So this is really about learning some new ways to incorporate into what you already may be doing and asking yourself some questions about whether or not the current way is working for you. So what is stress? Let's talk about that first. Very briefly, stress is caused by uncertainty and the unknown. Oftentimes, when we don't have all the answers, or when we are searching the answers, or when something happens that is out of our control and we may not have all the information, that causes a stress. Inside, it is a physical feeling. It is something that we feel in all of our aspects, both emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually, and as well as sexually. It has a decrease in our sexual life force energy. Or stress can also be positive. So when you think about your life experiences, your losses and your grief, but also the weddings and the birthings and the celebrations, those also work within all of those aspects. You feel charged. Maybe there is tension, absolutely, between the positivity and negativity of that experience. And it is far more seen as positive weddings, birthings, celebrations, because it oftentimes will add and will expand yourself. Where negative stressors oftentimes pull us inwards. They're more of a contractive kind of energy. And so there's a depletion of some of those emotional, physical, mental, spiritual aspects. And it actually has that dampering effect on some of the happiness, health, humor, and hope, and the harmony that we have in our life. So much of how we deal with, cope with, manage the stressors, both in our own personal life and in the world at large, is really dependent on our own attitude and approach. The way in which we see the particular life situation or the stressors, and the way in which we approach it. And in our society, and again, it's worthwhile to take a look at how your own particular family did this, how you learned to manage stressors in your life, both negative and positive. make an assessment on how you have learned to adapt, and then also look at the society, so the social structure, the cultural norms that are created in relationship to how we deal with stress. Those all help then for us to determine what are the patterns that are useful for us, such as, is it useful to deny the pain? Or is it useful, as some researchers are suggesting, to sit with, to create some time, to carve out an opportunity to sit with the suffering, the stressors? And there is so much more to say to this. This is some of the basic, and it may be not sitting with for hours on end. It might be to notice, to witness, to create a bit of a distance so that we can see things from a bit of a different vantage point. In that, we can then be able to shift our attitude and hence our approach. And again, as I said, influenced by our experience, by our coping history, and as well as how we learned to deal with stress within our own family, culture, community. So what is radical self-care? Radical self-care is really that visceral understanding that we need to put on our mask first, that we cannot provide care, support for another unless we find the resolve within ourselves. And this requires self-care. It requires putting yourself first, overcoming some of the languaging that we may have around the unworthiness of care or what that looks like. I think we have sometimes a notion that self-care is pampering ourselves, that it's having a bubble bath, or that there's somehow more than a basic necessity. And what I can tell you is that there is a requirement. My physical container and my psyche and my soul requires that I take the time in order to heal, in order to come back together, in order to come to center, so that I can be of service in a good way, that I can be my best self moving forward in the world. And that is a radical act, to take that time for yourself and to overcome some of the languaging that we have taken on around self-care. So how to be with stress? There is more to this than meets the circle here. I just wanted to remind you about the 5 aspects and what I have learned. This comes from some of the earth-based, as you see here, very much connected to elements, and I'll speak to this very briefly. In the wholeness of us, and I think that there's been a huge exploration as to what are the different elements of us. And so I like the wheels, I love the connectivity and the versatility and the interreliability of this wheel. So I'm going to give you a very brief teaching. So here are the 5 aspects of self. We have an emotional aspect. Oftentimes that is an association with the element of water. And it is also associated with our family. So how is it that we learn to be in relationship with other people, ourselves and other people? It is a very emotional and a very fluid kind of energy. And so oftentimes, if you feel yourself stressed emotionally, if you feel your heart be heavy, then the best place to be is around water, or to even bathe yourself. And it's nice to light a candle or two, but to really enable yourself to be in the waters of that emotion and to allow the emotions to flow through and to let them be released. Many people don't know that crying is one of the only ways, or I believe it's the only ways, maybe it's not, but it's one of the main ways. Crying is one of the main ways that we eliminate cortisol from our bodies as a way of reducing our stress response. We also have a physical aspect, and that is associated with the element of earth. We are made of this earth, and so we are always in a transformative process in our physical. And it is where our soul, our spirit, our essence, our who we are is expressed in this world. It is a very physical aspect. So when stress comes into the body, you may feel heaviness. I remember in my professional work, oftentimes feeling the heaviness on my back, the responsibility of the number of roles that I had to play. And so I can feel the heaviness in my body. And what I found the best way was to move, to alleviate some of the stressors. Actually, I have two ways that I do this. One is to move about, to dance, to put on some music and let my body move as a way of moving. Massage always helps, but sometimes it's not accessible. The other thing that I found really helpful is to enable myself to go into a meditation where I can visualize these stressors leaving my body. So really assisting the mental aspect to influence that physical. So I also will do a visualization to alleviate some of the physical stressors. The mental aspect of ourselves is associated with wind or air. And so many of the coping mechanisms are around taking the time to maybe jot down some of the mind chatter, really do some of the strategies to quiet the mind. Oftentimes being in nature and paying attention to natural sounds will decrease the chatter of the itty bitty shitty committee and will enable you to connect to your own inner voice. This is the really the radical benefit of this, taking the time, is to enable you to connect deeply to yourself. We also have a spiritual aspect, and oftentimes this is where we find the highest form of our determination, the way in which we move out to the world, how we want to create change, what gives us hope. And when we are stressed, when we feel helpless and hopeless, this fire element inside of us diminishes. And so this is where it takes, again, a radical action to do something. How is it that you're going to feed your spirit? What are the things that you can engage in? And the battle here for me has been the guilt of taking the time to be with myself, to find something that illuminates my hope, that is creative. And this is really, for me, it has been connecting with singing, ways in which I really engage, not in the intellectual or even the physical or emotional, but there's another element here. It's almost like it's beyond my um, my human experience. So how is it that you connect? Oftentimes it's faith, right? Having prayer, finding your connection to spirit. And then the sexual aspect here is not around sexual in the way of procreation, but in the way of creation, in the way of the sexual life force energy. And how can we find balance and be in the center of that, so we're not at the effect of our emotions or a physical experience or a mental chatter or our spiritual depletion, that we can be in the center and know that there are things that we can control. There are things that we have some dominion over, and starting with self. So even the act of spending time with yourself in quiet moments is engaging in that void element, in the life force energy as it began from nothing and it will go back to nothing. But having that stillness can give you an opportunity to find maybe new ways to be with the stressors in your own life and learn how to cope and manage in a different way. So as a recap, it's good to identify the stressor, take a little bit of time to reflect and see what is it me? Is it something else? Identify the emotion behind it. Oftentimes the stressors can trigger emotional past experiences. Find your balance and center. Find ways to recharge. Find ways that gives you more energy. Quiet your mind. if you can. Seek answers within from that central void. Feed your spirit and find a release. Talk to someone, write it down, express yourself in ways that maybe in our society is not deemed normal. Have time where you can cry and scream and rage, and ways that you can still and sleep and rest. I hope that this was helpful, and I encourage you to do all of this beautiful work that you're doing. Continue to learn, and I look forward to providing more insight and things that I know have worked for me.